Welcome to Dusk and Dust. Tonight we travel somewhere quiet and long forgotten, a place where winter came and never truly left. A small medieval village hidden far from busy roads, where people lived slowly and spoke softly. Nothing unusual ever happened there, until one winter everything became still. No sound, no movement, no trace of life. When spring finally arrived, something was missing, because the village was simply gone. Before the winter came, the village lived quietly. People followed the same gentle routines each day. Smoke rose slowly from small wooden homes. Footsteps echoed softly along narrow dirt paths. Everything felt calm and completely ordinary. As the air grew colder, preparations began. Wood was gathered and stacked carefully. Food was stored for the long, quiet season. No one rushed. Everything moved slowly. Winter was expected, like always. The first snow arrived without warning. It fell softly across the silent rooftops. The ground slowly turned white and still. Children watched from windows quietly. The season had begun. Days passed under a quiet sky. Snow covered every path and field. Fewer people walked outside now. The village grew slower each day. Silence became more noticeable. At night, the village felt even quieter. Candlelight flickered behind closed windows. Snow continued to fall without sound. The world outside felt distant. Everything moved toward stillness. Soon the roads became empty. No fresh footprints marked the snow. The paths remained untouched for days. No travelers passed through anymore. The village felt isolated. The forest stood quietly around the village. Trees held the weight of snow gently. No animals moved through the branches. Even the wind seemed to pause. Everything felt still. The village well remained untouched. No one came to draw water anymore. Snow gathered slowly around its edges. The place felt forgotten, as if time had stopped. Doors stayed closed for many days. No voices could be heard inside. Snow gathered quietly at each entrance. The village felt distant and silent. Nothing seemed to change. The center of the village stood empty. Snow fell gently across the ground. No movement disturbed the quiet space. The air felt heavy with stillness. Time passed without notice. Tools were left where they had been used. Nothing had been moved for days. Snow slowly covered every object. The signs of life faded quietly. Everything remained untouched. Chimneys no longer released smoke. The warmth inside seemed to fade. Cold settled quietly over the homes. No signs of activity remained. The silence deepened. Fog began to cover the village slowly. Shapes became harder to recognize. The world felt distant and unclear. Everything blended into silence. Nothing stood out anymore. The animal shelters stood open and empty. No movement came from inside. Even the smallest sounds were gone. The absence felt quiet and complete. Nothing remained. The river slowly froze beside the village. Its surface became smooth and still. No water could be heard moving. The silence spread even further. Winter held everything in place. Paths disappeared beneath the snow. No direction remained clear anymore. The village felt lost within itself. Everything looked the same. Stillness covered all. Inside the homes, everything was still. Fireplaces had gone completely cold. Rooms sat untouched and silent. No presence remained within them. Only emptiness filled the space. Snow continued to fall without pause. It covered every part of the village. Shapes slowly disappeared beneath it. The world became quiet and white. Everything faded gently. From a distance, the village was hard to see. It blended into the landscape completely. No movement broke the silence. Nothing stood apart from the snow. It felt like it was gone. When spring slowly arrived, the snow began to melt. The shapes of houses returned quietly, but something was missing from the scene. No people, no animals, no sound. The village had disappeared. As the snow slowly melted, the truth began to appear. The houses remained, but life had not returned. Doors stood closed, untouched and silent. No footsteps marked the soft ground. The absence felt complete and final. The center of the village stood empty again, but this time it felt different. There was no waiting, no quiet life inside. Only stillness remained in every direction. The silence felt deeper than before. Some doors had been left slightly open, as if someone had stepped out and never returned. The wind moved gently through the rooms. Nothing inside had been disturbed. Everything remained frozen in time. The roads around the village told no story. No tracks led away from the homes. No sign of movement could be found. It was as if no one had left at all. The mystery deepened quietly. The forest stood just as it always had. No broken branches, no disturbed paths. Nothing suggested sudden movement. Everything remained calm and untouched. Nature held no answers. Inside the homes, life seemed paused. Furniture remained in quiet order. Fireplaces were left cold and empty. No struggle could be seen anywhere. Only silence filled the rooms. Old records remained where they were kept. Nothing had been taken or moved. Names still rested quietly on the pages. The past remained written, but unanswered. The story had no ending. From a distance, the village looked unchanged. It still stood beneath the quiet sky, but something within it had vanished. An emptiness that could not be seen, yet could be deeply felt. Travelers who passed by stopped quietly. They looked upon the empty homes. Confusion settled over their thoughts. No explanation was given to them. They simply moved on. Even the sacred places were empty. Candles had long since burned away. No prayers echoed within the walls. The silence reached every corner. Nothing had been left behind. Fog slowly returned to the village. It covered the empty streets again. Shapes became distant and unclear. The silence remained untouched. The mystery stayed hidden. Some began to tell quiet stories. They spoke in soft and careful voices. Each version carried a different meaning, but none could be proven true. The mystery lived through words. One theory spoke of a silent departure. that the villagers left together, slowly, walking into the fog without sound. No urgency, no fear, just movement, and then nothing more. Another idea spoke of quiet illness, something unseen, spreading gently, caking strength without warning, leaving no visible marks behind, only absence and silence. Some believed the winter itself was the cause, that the cold had taken everything slowly, not with force, but with quiet persistence, until nothing remained inside, only empty space. Others spoke of something unseen, a force beyond simple understanding, something that called them away gently, without fear, without resistance, only quiet acceptance. With time, the village began to fade, not physically, but in memory. Fewer people spoke of it anymore. The story grew softer each year, until it almost disappeared. Nature slowly returned to the land. Grass grew between the empty paths. Walls aged and softened with time. The village blended into the earth, as if it had never been there. Eventually, very little remained, only small traces of what once existed, a memory without clear shape, a place without a voice, a story without an answer. Now, only silence rests there. The land holds no clear memory. What happened remains unknown. The village is gone completely, and the quiet remains forever. As the first story slowly fades away, the silence does not fully leave us. It gently carries us somewhere else, another place, just as quiet, just as forgotten. Another story begins, without sound. Far from the first village, another place existed, hidden quietly between hills and open land. Life there moved slowly and gently. Nothing ever seemed unusual. Everything felt peaceful. People followed their daily routines. They worked, rested, and spoke softly. Time passed without interruption. The village remained calm and steady. Nothing seemed out of place. At the center stood a tall bell tower. It marked the passing of quiet hours. Its sound echoed gently across the land, a steady rhythm of daily life, always the same, always calm. But one day, the bell did not ring. Morning passed without its sound. The silence felt slightly different, not loud, but noticeable. Something had changed. People noticed the quiet absence. They looked toward the tower slowly. No one rushed to question it. They simply stood and waited. The silence remained. Inside the tower, nothing had moved. The rope hung still in the air. Dust floated softly around it. No sign of disturbance appeared. Everything remained untouched. The streets slowly became quieter. Fewer footsteps echoed through them. People stayed inside a little longer. The village grew slower each day. The change was subtle, but real. The market began to feel empty. Some stalls remained closed. Voices grew softer, then faded. Movement became less frequent. The silence spread gently. At night, fewer lights remained. Windows stayed dark and still. The village rested in deeper silence. Nothing disturbed the calm air. Everything felt distant. Fog began to appear each morning. It covered the village slowly. Shapes became harder to see. The world felt quieter than before. Everything faded into stillness. The paths remained untouched again. No new footsteps appeared on the ground. Time passed without movement. The village stood, but did not live. The silence deepened. Doors stayed closed without reason. Windows showed no signs of life. The wind moved gently through the space, but nothing answered it. Only quiet remained. The bell tower remained silent. No sound marked the passing time. The rhythm of the village was gone. Everything felt disconnected. Stillness took its place. Inside the homes, life paused again. Food remained where it had been placed. Nothing had been taken or moved. The scene felt frozen in time, as if no one had left. From afar, the village looked empty. No movement could be seen anywhere. The silence filled every corner. Nothing broke the calm air. Everything remained still. The hills stood quietly above the village. They watched without change. No paths showed signs of travel. Nothing moved away from the place. The mystery remained closed. Travelers eventually arrived again. They stopped at the edge quietly. Something felt different immediately. The silence felt too complete. They did not step forward easily. They walked through the empty streets slowly. Their footsteps echoed softly. No voices answered them. No movement followed their steps. The village remained empty. They looked again toward the tower. Still, no sound came from above. Time felt paused in that place. Nothing moved forward anymore. The silence held everything. The night continues, slowly, without interruption. Our journey moves gently to another quiet place. A village resting in the hills of England, where people lived simple, careful lives, until one day something unseen arrived, not with sound, not with warning, but with a quiet presence carried in silence. What followed was not chaos, but a choice, a decision made slowly and remembered forever. The village of Eyam lived quietly among the hills. Stone houses stood close together in calm rows. People followed their daily routine slowly. Nothing unusual disturbed their peaceful days. Life moved gently, as it always had. One day, a simple package arrived. Cloth sent from a distant city. It seemed ordinary, like many before. There was nothing unusual about it, at least nothing visible. The cloth felt slightly damp to the touch. It carried no sound, no warning. It rested quietly in the room. No one suspected its presence. It remained still and unnoticed. Soon, the tailor began to feel unwell. At first, it seemed small and ordinary, a quiet weakness, nothing more. But it did not pass quickly. It stayed and slowly grew. The workshop became quiet soon after. Tools remained where they had been used. No movement returned to the room. The space felt suddenly still. Something had changed, quietly. People began to notice small changes. They spoke softly among themselves, nothing loud, nothing sudden, just quiet concern spreading slowly. The village remained calm. Then another person became unwell, and then another and another. The pattern moved quietly through homes. No one rushed to react, but the silence grew heavier. The streets slowly became empty. Fewer footsteps echoed each day. Doors stayed closed a little longer. The village moved into stillness, without any sound. Some gathered inside the church quietly. They spoke in soft and careful voices. They searched for understanding, but answers did not come easily. Only silence filled the space. The hills surrounded the village closely. No easy path led away from it. The world outside felt distant. The village stood alone, in silence. And the quiet continued. Then a quiet decision was made, not quickly, but with deep thought. The people chose to stay where they were, to not let the illness spread beyond. It was a calm but heavy choice. Markers were placed around the village, invisible lines that would not be crossed. No one would leave or enter. The boundary stood in silence, a quiet act of protection. The roads became completely empty. No travelers passed through anymore. The outside world remained far away. The village held itself in place, without movement. Supplies were left at the edges, carefully, without contact. Food appeared quietly, then taken away. No voices were exchanged, only silent understanding. Inside the village, life grew slower. Homes remained closed for long hours. Voices became softer each day. Movement faded into stillness. The silence deepened. People gathered less often now. When they did, they stood apart. Distance became part of life, even in quiet moments together. The calm remained, but heavy. Evenings arrived gently as before. The sun set behind the hills slowly, but something felt different now. The quiet held a deeper weight, and the village listened. Fog returned often to the village. It covered the land in soft silence. Shapes faded into gentle shadows. Everything felt distant and slow. The world became quieter. The paths remained untouched for days. No footsteps marked the ground. Time moved quietly forward. Nothing interrupted its flow. Only stillness remained. The village stood, calm and silent. It did not move or change quickly. Its people remained within its borders, holding their quiet decision, and waiting in silence.
As days slowly passed, the village grew quieter. Fewer voices could be heard in the distance. Doors remained closed for longer hours. Life moved gently, but with less presence. The silence deepened with each passing day. People began to move alone more often. Distance became part of daily life. Even familiar faces stayed far apart. No one spoke loudly anymore. Everything remained soft and quiet. The churchyard slowly filled, but not with crowds. People stood far from one another. Silence replaced shared words. Each moment felt heavy but calm. Nothing disturbed the still air. The leaders watched quietly from a distance. They did not speak with urgency. Their decision remained unchanged, to stay and protect others beyond, even in growing silence. The boundaries remained firmly in place. No one crossed beyond them. The outside world stayed safe and distant. The village held its quiet promise without hesitation. Supplies continued to arrive quietly, placed gently at the village edge. No contact, no voices exchanged, only silent understanding remained, a quiet connection from afar. At midday, the streets stayed empty. No footsteps echoed across the ground. Time passed without interruption. The village rested in stillness. Nothing moved or changed quickly. Inside the homes, people rested quietly. Voices became softer each day. Movement slowed almost completely. Everything felt gentle and distant. The silence remained constant. Rain began to fall over the village. It touched the empty streets gently. No one stepped outside to feel it. The sound blended into silence. Everything felt calm and slow. From the hills, the village looked unchanged. Stone houses stood as they always had, but life within them had faded. The quiet choice remained strong, even as everything slowed. The bell no longer marked the hours. Time passed without its sound. The rhythm of life had softened. Nothing guided the day anymore. Only silence remained. Sometimes people stood outside quietly, not close but not fully alone. They shared space without words, a quiet presence from afar. And then they returned inside. Homes slowly became more still. Rooms remained untouched for days. Nothing changed within their walls. The quiet settled deeply inside. Everything felt paused. Fog returned once again. It covered the village gently. Shapes became soft and unclear. The world felt distant and quiet. Everything faded into calm silence. Markers began to appear across the land, placed quietly, one by one. No gatherings, no loud moments, only calm remembrance remained, in complete silence. Evenings continued as before. The sun set gently behind the hills. Light faded slowly across the land, but something was always missing. The quiet felt deeper now. The village grew nearly empty. Very little movement remained. The silence became complete. Nothing interrupted its calm. Everything rested in stillness. The village stood, but without life. Its form remained unchanged, but its presence had faded. Only the quiet decision remained, and the memory of it. The hills watched over the silence. Nothing disturbed the calm land. Time moved slowly forward. The story settled into memory, without sound. And so the village remained, not for what it lost, but for what it chose. A quiet sacrifice made in silence and remembered without sound.
This silence still remains with us. It does not leave, it only shifts from quiet villages to distant halls of stone, from empty fields to royal chambers where power once lived, softly and slowly. Tonight, we move toward a different kind of story, not of disappearance, but of quiet confusion. A king who ruled a great land, yet slowly drifted away from reality itself and into a fragile world of his own making. In the kingdom of France, there lived a king. His name was Charles VI. He ruled over a vast and quiet land. The palace stood strong around him. Everything appeared calm from the outside. In his early years, he was steady and composed. He spoke with quiet confidence. Those around him trusted his presence. Nothing seemed unusual at first. His rule began gently. The royal court moved slowly around him. Advisors spoke in careful tones. Decisions were made without urgency. The atmosphere remained controlled. Everything followed a steady rhythm. But slowly, something began to change. The king spent more time alone. Long, quiet walks filled his days. His thoughts drifted further away. Something unseen had begun. He began to look at himself differently. His hands no longer felt the same. A quiet worry entered his mind. He questioned what he was made of. The thought remained and grew. Inside his chamber, silence surrounded him. He sat without speaking for long hours. The world outside felt distant. His thoughts moved slowly inward. Everything became quiet and fragile. He no longer allowed others near him. Even a simple touch felt dangerous. He stepped back from those around him. Distance became his comfort. The fear remained calm but constant. He began to sit very carefully. Every movement became slow and controlled. He feared something might break, not around him, but within him. A quiet belief had taken hold. The court watched him in silence. No one spoke loudly about the change. They observed and waited. Uncertainty filled the quiet space, but nothing was said openly. Soon he surrounded himself with softness. Cushions filled the spaces around him. Every surface became gentle and safe. He moved with great care, as if protecting something fragile. He looked into mirrors quietly, searching for something unclear. His reflection did not comfort him. Instead, it deepened his thoughts. The feeling remained unresolved. At night, his thoughts grew stronger. Silence filled the room completely. No voices reached him there. Only his quiet belief remained, and it did not fade. Those around him adjusted slowly. They moved with quiet care. No sudden actions were made. Everything became gentle and slow. The palace followed his silence. The palace itself grew quieter. Long halls echoed less each day. Movement became softer and slower. The space reflected his state, calm but distant.
He often remained still for hours, not moving, not speaking. Time passed around him gently. He stayed within his thoughts, unchanged and quiet. Sometimes he looked outside. The world continued as before. Nothing seemed broken out there, but inside everything felt fragile and uncertain. Morning light entered slowly. It touched the room gently, but nothing truly changed. The quiet remained inside him, steady and unmoving. The court gathered, but spoke less. Decisions became slower and softer. Everything adjusted around the king. The kingdom continued quietly, without clear direction. He remained surrounded by softness. Every movement remained careful. The belief stayed with him always, unchanged and deeply held. Nothing moved it away. And so the palace stood quietly, holding a king lost within himself. The world continued beyond its walls, but inside, time moved differently, soft, slow, and fragile.
As time passed, his stillness grew deeper. He moved less with each passing day. Even small motions felt unnecessary. The world around him slowed to match. Everything remained quiet and fragile. More layers of softness surrounded him. Every surface became gentle and safe. Those around him acted with great care. No sudden movement was allowed. The silence guided everything. He continued to watch his hands closely, as if searching for something hidden. The feeling did not leave him. It stayed, quiet and constant, unchanged with time. The court spoke in softer voices now. Whispers replaced open discussion. Concern remained, but unspoken. No one wished to disturb the calm. The quiet held everything together. The palace corridors grew emptier. Fewer footsteps echoed through them. Movement became rare and slow. The building itself felt distant, almost as if it were waiting. He avoided standing whenever possible. Feeting felt safer, more controlled. Each action was carefully measured. Nothing was done without thought. The fear remained gentle but firm. The idea stayed with him always, that he was something fragile like glass, easily broken, easily lost. The belief settled deeply within and did not leave. At night, he remained awake. The silence felt even stronger then. No sound reached his thoughts. Only his belief stayed present, soft but unchanging. Moonlight entered the room slowly. It touched everything without sound. He remained still within it, unmoving and quiet, lost in his own world. Those around him kept their distance. They understood without speaking. No one came too close. The space remained carefully held. Everything stayed controlled. The throne room stood mostly empty. Its purpose slowly faded away. Decisions were no longer made there. The kingdom moved without its center, quietly and slowly. Even simple things required care. A chair, a step, a small movement. Everything was tested slowly. Nothing was trusted completely. The world felt uncertain to him. Papers remained unread for long periods. Decisions waited without urgency. Time passed quietly over them. Nothing demanded attention anymore.
Everything slowed down. Even the palace air felt different. Soft fog entered open spaces. Everything appeared slightly distant. Nothing stood clearly anymore. The calm deepened. Hours passed without movement. He remained in the same place. Time moved, but he did not. The stillness became complete and deeply quiet. Light moved slowly across the room. Morning became evening without notice. Nothing interrupted the passing time. The silence remained unchanged and constant. The palace continued to stand strong, but its energy had faded away. Rooms remained quiet and still. Nothing filled the empty space. Only silence lived there. He sat alone within large spaces. The distance around him grew wider. Nothing reached him anymore. The world felt far away and unreachable. Slowly he seemed to fade, not in body, but in presence. The king remained, yet distant. His world had become separate and quiet beyond reach. And so the story rests quietly. A king lost within his own belief, not in chaos, but in silence. A fragile world held in his mind and remembered in calm stillness.